Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and this is the audio version of my newsletter. You can leave comments, find out more, subscribe, and so on at simonkjones.substack.com. So today is all about figuring out the serial publishing model and how I kind of got it wrong, maybe. There are many ways of publishing your work, and we're living in something of a golden age for author choice. My chosen route is to send out chapters in serial form, and I'm now fairly certain that for the last 4 years I've been doing it a bit wrong. In 2021, I started publishing Tales from the Triverse, which is now nearing completion. It's a huge thing at over 350,000 words. I've been head down for that entire time, making sure I get the story out into the world to the best of my ability. And while it's gone well and I'm pleased with the book and its reception, I'm starting to think I've missed several opportunities. So, publishing a weekly serial has benefits. That's why I do it, obviously. So, it builds a long term relationship with readers. The time investment makes readers really care about the story and the characters, and the regular pace helps with being a consistently productive writer, which I suppose is kind of the main thing for me. It helps me stay focused and actually finish projects. But there's also obvious challenges. There's the slow delivery, which will frustrate many readers. It takes a long time to publish the entire story. I've been doing this one for 4 years. I'm going slightly crazy. It's difficult for readers to get on board like midway through because they have to figure out how this thing works and where the start is and all that kind of stuff. And as such, navigating the book when it's in an online kind of newsletter form can be really frustrating. And some readers just don't like reading on a screen, so it doesn't matter how well you do it, they would just rather have a print book. Some of this I identified fairly early on and took steps to address, like back in 2022. I did stuff like adding an audiobook version of chapters and an ebook compilation, although that was exclusive for paid subscribers. An important UX tweak was adding in an index/introductory post to help new readers find their way in, especially if you're publishing on something like Substack, which is what I use. It doesn't natively support fiction serials, so you have to kind of help people along as best you can. Despite doing a bunch of stuff like that, I've missed several tricks. And today, this is all about me reflecting on a decade of writing online serials and 4 years of publishing specifically on Substack in the hope of doing it better next time. I'm trying to come up with a better model, and I'd really value your feedback, whether that's as a writer, a reader, or a bit of both. So, in marketing, which is kind of, I suppose, what I do for the day job for my sins, we're obsessed with funnels. The notion being that if you're selling an expensive product, you can't generally expect new customers to just come along and immediately buy it. Like, that'd be nice, but it's not that simple generally. They're going to have to think about it or be convinced in some way. This can sometimes be kind of brute forced through aggressive marketing spend, which basically means ads. If you've got loads of money, that's how Transformers movies do really well at the cinema, basically. But it's often more effective over a longer time period to instead create a funnel. And this is about creating multiple touch points at which a customer can jump aboard and acknowledging that different people have specific interests and needs. So in the kind of classic funnel, you imagine an inverted pyramid, like big at the top, small at the bottom. And you've got these different stages in the pyramid. You've got like awareness, then interest, then engagement, and then action. So at the top, you have people first becoming aware of your product. They know it exists, but they're not going to do anything about it. If you can move them from there to the next stage down, which is interest, it means they've not only heard of your product, but it's stayed in their mind. Maybe they're going to look up some reviews or ask friends about it. Shift people to engagement, and you've got the beginnings of fans. These are people who go out of their way to keep an eye on your product. Pricing, new versions, hunting down reviews and analysis. The action stage is when someone finally decides to make a decision and go for it. They're buying your product. You can, of course, define these stages in all sorts of different ways depending on the context of what you're doing. But the core point is to understand that it's pretty easy to get people into the top stage. That's why it's an inverted pyramid shape, where you have lots of people initially, but far fewer people by the time you get down to the bottom. So applying this to an online serial is a fun experiment, especially in the context of a newsletter with an optional patronage model like the one I do. So for example, for a newsletter, like awareness would be when someone sees a link or recommendation to my publication. If they move down into the interests section, that means they've maybe clicked on the link and they've visited my publication's website. Engagement would mean they've read some of my articles or stories, they've maybe left a comment or liked something, but they're not subscribed. And then the action would be they have subscribed to my newsletter. That's what I want them to do. I actually think my newsletter is closer to a slightly tweaked model where everything shifts up a level and the final section is taking out a paid subscription. So at the engagement level, someone subscribes and maybe comments, likes, takes part in the conversation, but then the final step, the action, is they become a paid subscriber. That's kind of a decentish representation of what I've been doing for the last 4 years, and it's gone pretty well. I'm thrilled and generally amazed / quite confused at the number of people who have chosen to subscribe to what I do. Thank you very much. But here's the thing. By being a subscriber, by being here and reading or listening to today's newsletter, you're already someone who's on board with the general idea of reading fiction and fiction tips in newsletter form or in the Substack app, which is lovely, but we're a very specific breed of reader and writer, early adopters in a way. There are huge numbers of readers and writers who don't use Substack and don't make a habit of reading newsletters or listening to podcasts like this audio version. Many people simply dislike reading on a screen, like no matter what. All of this is without factoring in the inherent weirdness of online serials, where a story is drip-fed week by week over a long period of time. It's more like watching a TV show than it is to reading a novel. I have a TV-like story that is being seen primarily by readers of novels or newsletters, while people who love TV serials have no idea that my writing exists. There are many contradictions and challenges here. And moving people through that interest, then engagement, then action flow is hugely difficult, like it always is, but in this particular example, it's hard work. Adding navigation aids, index posts, previously on summaries, and so on is about making it easier to shift people down the funnel, but some people are always going to bounce off right at the start, at that awareness stage. And for a while now, I've had the sneaking thought that I've been missing something. I was listening to the Off Panel podcast last week, which was an interview with writer Kieran Gillen, and pro tip, if you have an opportunity to listen to a podcast with Kieran Gillen, do so. Even if you've not read his stuff or have no interest in comics, he's one of those interviewees who just empties their brain into the mic, and listening to them speak is as good as attending a writing class. Quick humble brag, I was very fortunate to interview Kieran many years ago for the Writing Life podcast, all about world building. You can still find that if you go and Google it. Anyway, in that off-panel episode, there's much talk about the business model around comics. A simple version to sort of paraphrase it, and apologies to Kieran if I'm mangling this, but it sounded to me like it went like this. So 1, comics get released as single issues. These are known as floppies because they're staple bound without a thicker paperback or hardback cover. You know, your classic single issue floppy comic, which you usually only see in specialist comic shops. Number 2, at some point, perhaps after like 6 or 10 issues or something, those individual releases are bundled up into a trade paperback. This is still comic shaped, but is bound like a book. You tend to see these collections on shelves in bookshops. And then down the line, step 3, you might have larger collections that bring together multiple trades or hardback editions. Now, the interesting part that Kieran talks about is how the trades become increasingly important over time. The initial floppies get you to the first trade, but the trade will be picked up by a whole bunch of readers who can't be asked with monthly floppies. They just want a good chunk of story, conveniently packaged like a normal book. Then the second trade comes out, which boosts sales of the first trade, and suddenly you're gaining more readers through the trade paperbacks than you are through the individual floppies. Similar cumulative sales theory to writing several books in a series. Sales only really get going once you've got 3+ books for people to binge. Point is, comics readers have a couple of ways of engaging with the material, which cater to very different lifestyles and reading habits. So this kind of requires someone going to a comics book store, right? If you think about the floppies end of things, right? They need to go to a comic store to find them. That immediately cuts out a vast number of readers who might not have a nearby comic shop or might not be used to shopping there. This works for people that like reading floppies and are used to it, but it leaves out a huge number of readers who might be up for the story but don't like the format. The comics industry would struggle even more if this was the only way it published. This is effectively what I've been doing. This is how I've been publishing my online serial via this newsletter. I've only been delivering floppies to you wonderful subscribers who like reading the digital equivalent of single issue floppies. But at some point, the comics industry figured out that it needed to get into more shops, and most bookshops were not going to stock floppies. Hence, the trade paperback was invented. Some people can't be bothered with the hassle of collecting multiple trades and prefer to buy a single book that contains the entire story. Hence, books containing entire runs from start to finish. Some people don't like the form factor of a comic book because it sits awkwardly on shelves next to novels. And so you have books like DC's All-Star Superman, which are produced in smaller form, or Brian K. Vaughan's book-shaped print edition of Spectators. All of these variants are providing different on-ramps for readers. Rather than having a single funnel and trying to force people down it who simply don't want to be there, it's about creating several funnels to suit different preferences and lifestyles. So, in terms of what I'm going to try and do next time, the Tales from the Triverse train has already left the station, so I'm not going to be making any changes to that setup at this point. Instead, I'm looking forward to my next serial project and how I'll publish it. Probably. So continuing the comics analogy, if we take individual newsletter installments to equal floppies, then I need to add trade paperbacks to my lineup. Depending on the scale of the overall serial project, I'm thinking this could either be fanzine-style collections of like 6 to 12 chapters or slightly larger novella-shaped paperbacks. These would be available in ebook and physical print form. They would need to be slickly produced, of course, and feel as good as a professional high-quality book release. Releases would then be at regular intervals, maybe every 3 to 6 months. These would be purchasable products that people could buy and read like they would any other book. They would exist alongside and separate from the newsletter. Given the timescales, these would most likely be printed and distributed using something like Ingram Spark. That would provide maximum coverage and availability while keeping costs manageable and production speed high. Over time, a reader would build up a lovely collection of these editions. At the conclusion of the serial, or after wrapping up significant arcs, larger collections could be released. These might combine 3 of the individual trades, for example, to form a more traditional, novel-sized thing. There might be the possibility of fancier collector hardbacks and that kind of thing. The expectation is not for individuals to buy into all of these variants, just to be clear, but to provide options for different types of reader. Some readers will only read via the weekly newsletter. Others will grab the periodic paperback collections or wait for the whole thing to be released as a single object, like years down the line. These are not mutually exclusive routes either. There's a porosity to the funnels, and some readers of the paperback collections will shift over to the weekly newsletter and vice versa. Some readers might subscribe to the newsletter for behind-the-scenes insights, but still prefer to read the stories in print. So I've got a diagram in the newsletter version of this where I attempt to kind of visualize this. Have a look if you want. It's not really possible to describe it in audio. Anyway, this all sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? And yes, it does. As with all things in publishing these days, though, every bit of it is kind of optional. I've been publishing Triverse quite happily for 4 years and have been thrilled with the general response. This is more me thinking about what else I could have done to push things further. If you just want to focus on writing, then do that. For me, I've been writing weekly serials for over a decade, so my tinkerer brain is inevitably looking for a new thing to try. This hybrid model, mixing newsletter, ebook, and print in various ways, really appeals. I think it would be cool. The good news is that it's all quite doable. The new Affinity Studio software is entirely free and enables advanced ebook and print layout. Ingram Spark is a print-on-demand service that I haven't used yet, but will be experimenting with soon, and alternatives exist. Professional editors, designers, and cover artists can be hired. We have the technology, in other words, even if we don't always have the time. This model excites me also because it feels like a lovely blend of old and new. It's incorporating the resurgence of 19th and early 20th century prose serials with the handmade zines of the 90s and the singular novel, all rolled up into a holistic offering that people can pick and choose from like a menu. It's about meeting readers where they are. I haven't even mentioned like audiobooks and podcast distribution, which should absolutely be somewhere on the diagram. Just assume that every format also includes an audio alternative. The central hub remains the author's newsletter. That list is the core component, the spine to which everything else is connected. Whether you're self-publishing, traditional publishing, or something in between, maintaining your own list is what gives you continuity and creates direct links to readers. That in turn opens up interesting opportunities. Is there a subscription tier, for example, that includes copies of the print editions? Anyway, let me know what you think. Does this make some sort of sense, or am I talking rubbish? Have you seen good examples of some of this kind of thing being done already? So you can leave comments over at simonkjones.substack.com, where you'll find all sorts of other stuff to do with serial fiction that I blather on about. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.